If the Duke hears you, we're ruined.
If the Duke hears you, we are ruined. The maid tightened her hand over his mouth. Hesper could feel his blood soaking through her sleeve. Warm, slow, and far too much of it. Footsteps thundered down the corridor. Closer, closer. And the man dying quietly in her arms. She had buried him 3 years ago. With her own 2 hands. So how in God's name was he alive? And what would the Duke do if he found them like this? Her, a servant, sheltering a man the entire kingdom believed was dead. Stay with me, because part 2 is where everything she's ever believed comes crashing down. Hit that subscribe button. Please don't make me beg, my love. And I promise you, you won't sleep until you hear what happens next. The footsteps stopped, not faded, not passed, stopped, right outside the linen closet where Hesper crouched in the dark. Her palm still pressed against the mouth of a man who was supposed to be 3 years buried. She did not breathe, did not blink. The man beneath her hand had gone very still too, though she could feel the wild, uneven hammer of his heart against her ribs. 3 years she had carried his name like a stone in her chest. 3 years she had laid wildflowers on a grave she had dug with her own bleeding hands. And now here he was, breathing into her palm in a cupboard of folded sheets, while the Duke of Ravenwick himself stood inches away on the other side of a thin wooden door. A voice, low and bored, drifted through the wood. Search the east wing again. He cannot have gone far with a wound like that. And gentlemen, when you find him, do remember that I should very much like to kill him myself. Then the footsteps moved on. Hesper let out the breath she had been holding, and slowly, carefully, lifted her hand from his mouth. He sucked in a shuddering gasp, and even in the candle dark she could see the shape of his face, the same face she had wept over in a stone chapel 3 winters ago. Sharper now, harder. A pale scar ran from his temple to his jaw that had not been there before, and there were grey threads in his hair that had no business being there at all. "You were dead," she whispered. Her voice cracked clean down the middle. "I held your hand. I felt it go cold. I closed your eyes myself." He tried to speak. Blood came instead, dark at the corner of his mouth, and she pressed the hem of her apron against the wound in his side without thinking. Her hands knew the work. Her hands had always known it. She had been the housekeeper's quiet shadow before that, and the laundress's foundling before that, and before that, nothing at all. Just a baby left on a kitchen step in winter, with no name and no story to call her own. The old Duchess of Ravenwick, may God keep her, had given her the name Hesper because she had been found at evening. Hesper, the evening star, a pretty name for a girl who had nothing else to her name. She had earned everything else, every scrap of bread, every coin in her tin box under the floorboard, every careful breath of trust in this great cold house, and now this man, this impossible man, was about to cost her all of it. "Caspian," she said, and his eyes flickered open at the sound of his own name on her tongue. "Caspian, look at me. Stay with me. Do not you dare close your eyes." His lips moved. Hesper. Just her name. Like he was tasting it. Like he had been saying it in the dark for 3 years and could not believe she was here to hear it at last. She wanted to scream at him. She wanted to strike him across his beautiful, ruined face. She wanted to ask him 1,000 questions and shake every answer out of him until her arms ached and her throat bled. Why did you let me bury an empty coffin? Why did you let me kneel in the snow and beg God to bring you back? Why did you come back, now tonight, of all nights, bleeding into my apron in the Duke's own house? But there was no time. There was never any time for women like her. She tore a strip from her underskirt and bound his side as tightly as she dared. He hissed through his teeth and caught her wrist, and his grip, even half undone with blood loss, was stronger than she remembered. There was something in his eyes that frightened her more than the Duke ever had. A purpose, a hunger, the look of a man who had crawled out of his own grave for a reason and had not yet finished the climbing. "Listen to me," he breathed. "The Duke does not know it is me. He thinks I am only a thief who slipped a knife between his guard's ribs. If he learns the truth, Hesper, if he so much as suspects, he will burn this house to its foundations to be certain of me, every maid, every footman, every stable boy who ever held the door for me. Do you understand what I am telling you?" She understood. God help her, she understood far too well. The Duke of Ravenwick was not a man who forgave. He was not a man who forgot. He was a man who collected slights the way other men collected horses. And whatever Caspian had done 3 years ago, whatever had sent him into the cold ground with her tears salting his face, the Duke had plainly not finished with him. "Why are you here?" she whispered. "Why now? Why me? Of all the souls in England you might have crawled to." He looked at her, then with an expression she could not put a name to, something fierce and broken and full of a thing he had no right to feel after 3 years of silence. "Because there is no one in this world I trust but you," he said. "And because tomorrow night the Duke will hold a ball in his own gilded hall. And if I am not standing in that ballroom before the clock strikes midnight, Hesper, every soul in this house will be dead by morning. Yours first of all." The candle in the hallway guttered. Somewhere far below, a great old clock began to chime the hour, slow and heavy as a funeral bell. And Hesper, the foundling girl, with the evening name, knew with a terrible clarity that the small, safe life she had built so carefully, brick by quiet brick, was already over before this hour finished its chiming. She just did not yet know what would rise from the ashes of it. Who was Caspian truly, that the Duke would tear the world apart to find him? What had happened 3 winters ago in the chapel where she said goodbye to a man who had not stayed dead? And what could one maid possibly do, in 1 day and 1 stolen night, to keep a houseful of innocent souls from the grave? Stay with me, my loves, because part 2 is where Hesper makes a choice she can never take back. And the Duke begins to suspect that the quietest girl in his household is hiding the loudest secret of all. Please, I am begging you, subscribe to the channel if your heart is racing the way mine is right now, because the next part is already waiting in the dark, and I cannot bear to tell it to an empty room. Your love is what keeps these stories breathing. Do not leave me here alone." She had to move him. That was the first clear thought that cut through the storm in her head. The linen closet was too close to the east corridor, too close to the search, and Caspian's blood was already soaking through the strip of underskirt she had tied around him. If a single drop fell on the polished floor outside this door, they were finished. Hesper steadied her shaking hands and slid an arm beneath his shoulders. He was heavier than he had any right to be for a man half drained of blood, but she had carried heavier things in her life. She had carried his coffin. She had carried the silence that came after. She could carry this too. "Lean on me," she breathed against his ear. "Do not make a sound. Not one, Caspian, I swear to God." He nodded once, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath the stubble. Together they slipped out into the servants' passage, the narrow black artery that ran behind the great house like a vein behind a body's skin. The Duke and his guests never set foot in these tunnels. They did not know they existed. To them, the candles simply lit themselves, and the fires simply burned, and the chamber pots simply emptied. To Hesper, these passages were the only place in this whole gilded prison where she had ever been able to breathe. She knew every loose board, every cold draught, every shadow that fell at every hour. She had spent 11 years learning this house the way other women learned scripture, and Tonight, that knowledge was the only thing standing between Caspian's heartbeat and his last. She brought him to her own small room. In the attic, the one with the sloped ceiling and the single window that looked out onto nothing but rooftops and rain. She lowered him onto her narrow cot, and only when the door was bolted and the curtain drawn did she allow herself to truly look at him. God in heaven, he was so changed. The boy she had loved at 16 was gone. In his place was a man with weather in his face and silver at his temples, and a stillness about him that had nothing to do with the wound. He had been a stable hand once, in this very house, when she was a kitchen girl with chapped red hands and a head full of foolish hope. They had met in the kitchen garden at dawn for 2 whole summers, and he had told her she was the prettiest thing in Yorkshire, and she had believed him because she had wanted to, and because no one had ever called her pretty before. Her mother had not called her anything. Her mother had left her on a kitchen step with a name pinned to her shawl and never come back. The cook had thrown the slip of paper into the fire before Hesper could learn to read it. "You do not need a name from a woman who did not want you," the cook had said. "The old Duchess will give you a better one." And she had. Hesper, Evening Star, a name from a kinder mouth. But the old Duchess died when Hesper was 12, and the new Duke came home from his foreign travels with frost in his eyes and a temper that could turn a room cold, and the house had not been kind since. Hesper had learned to be small, to be quiet, to be the shadow that moved the trays and folded the linens and kept her head down and her tongue still. It had kept her safe, it had kept her alive, until Caspian had kissed her behind the cherry tree the summer she turned 17, and for one wild season she had let herself dream of something better than safety. Then he had died, or so they told her. A horse had thrown him on the North Road, they said. They had brought back a body wrapped in canvas, the face too ruined to look upon, and the new Duke himself had stood at her shoulder at the burial and said, with a strange, small smile, that perhaps now she might attend to her duties without distraction. She should have known then. She should have seen it in the curl of his lip. But she had been 17 and drowning, and grief had stopped up her eyes. Now she pressed clean linen to Caspian's side, and her hands were not shaking any more. They were perfectly, terribly still. "You were not thrown from a horse," she said. "It was not a question." "No, he did it," he tried. She closed her eyes, the room tilted. 11 years of small, careful breaths, of "Yes, my lord," and "Of course, my lord," and "As you wish, my lord," and all the while she had been serving the man who had tried to murder the only soul who ever loved her. She had brought him tea. She had laid out his slippers. She had stood at his elbow at her own beloved's graveside while he smiled. Something inside her went very quiet and very dark, like a candle blown out in a deep cellar. "Hesper!" His voice was thin, but his hand found hers on the linen and held it. His fingers were cold. "Look at me. Do not go where you are going. I need you here. I need you sharp." She opened her eyes. He was watching her with that fierce, broken look again, and something in her chest gave a slow, painful turn. The way an old lock turns when the right key finally finds it. "Why did you not come back for me?" she whispered. 3 years, Caspian. I would have gone with you anywhere. I would have walked to the sea barefoot. You knew that. You knew that, and you let me grieve you. I let you live," he said. His thumb moved once across her knuckles, the smallest motion, and yet it undid something in her that she had spent 3 years stitching shut. "If he had thought for one moment that I lived, he would have used you to find me. He would have hurt you, Hesper. He would have done worse than hurt you. So I bled into a ditch on the North Road, and I crawled, and I waited, and I planned. Every hour of every day, for 3 years, and now I am here." "Why now?" He was quiet for a long moment. Outside the small window, the rain began, soft as a kept secret. "Because tomorrow night," he said, "the Duke means to announce his engagement, and the girl he means to marry, Hesper, is the only person left alive who can prove what he did to me, and what he did to my sister, and what he means to do to you." The world tilted again. Slower this time, more terrible. "His engagement to whom?" she whispered, though some part of her, some cold knowing part, already had the answer waiting like a stone in her mouth. Caspian's eyes did not leave hers. "To you, Hesper. He means to announce his engagement to you." Somewhere far below, a door slammed. A man's voice barked an order. Bootsteps began to climb. Who was Caspian's sister? And what unspeakable thing had the Duke done to her? Why would a man like Ravenwick stoop to wed a foundling maid? And what darker purpose lay behind so strange a choice? And could Hesper, with one night and a house full of enemies, save the man she had buried twice over without burying herself in his place? Stay with me, my darlings, because part 3 is where Hesper walks into the lion's den in silk and pearls, and the Duke begins his slow, terrible, and Caspian must watch from the shadows as the woman he loves or smiles at the man who tried to kill him. Please, please subscribe to the channel if your heart is breaking the way mine is, because the next part is the one that will make you cry, and I want you here when it does. Do not leave Hesper alone in that ballroom. She needs you. I need you. Stay. The bootsteps were on the servant's stair. Hesper heard them and felt the blood leave her face, all at once, the way water drains from a basin when the stopper is pulled. 3 flights, maybe 4. Whoever was climbing was in no hurry, which somehow was worse, because it meant they knew exactly where they were going. She moved without thinking. She pulled the curtain across the small window, snuffed the candle on the washstand, and turned to Caspian with a wildness in her face she could not hide. "Under the bed," she whispered. "Now, do not argue with me. Hesper, I cannot. You can and you will. If they find you here, we are both dead before the cock crows. Move, Caspian. I swear by every saint I do not believe in." Move, he moved. He bit down on his own knuckle to keep from crying out as he slid himself off the cot and onto the floor, and she helped him roll beneath the low wooden frame with a strength she had not known, her arms still owned. She threw the bloodied apron under after him, pulled the threadbare quilt down over the side of the bed to hide the shadow of him, and was sitting on the edge, brushing out her hair when the knock came. 3 slow taps, then the door opened without waiting for her answer. The housekeeper stood in the dim hall holding a single tallow candle. Mrs. Aldenshaw, 60 years old and made of iron and silence, with eyes that had watched Hesper grow from a foundling baby woman and had never once given anything away. "His Grace requires you," she said. Hesper made her voice small. She made it confused. She made it the voice of a girl just woken from sleep, which was a skill she had perfected at the age of 9 and had never once let rust. "Me, Mrs. Aldenshaw, at this hour?" "You, at this hour. Get dressed. The blue muslin, not the grey, and do something about your hair, girl. You look like you have been wrestling in the hedges." The door closed. Hesper sat very still and listened to the housekeeper's slow tread retreat down the stair. Beneath the bed, Caspian let out a breath that sounded like a man surfacing from deep water. "Hesper," he whispered, "I know. He cannot see you like this. There is blood on your collar, on your wrists, on your hem. Hesper, look at yourself." She looked. He was right. She was painted in him. His blood streaked across her white apron and dried in the creases of her palms and crusted under her broken fingernails. She had the wild, absurd thought that she had finally been marked by him after all these years of being his secret, and that the Duke was about to see it stamped all over her skin. She washed in the cold water of the basin until her hands were raw. She changed into the blue muslin Mrs. Aldenshaw had named, which was older than she was and had belonged to some other maid before her. and she pinned her hair back with hands that would not stop trembling, no matter how she scolded them. She bound up Caspian's wound again, with a clean strip torn from her own shift, and she pressed a flask of water into his hand and a heel of bread she had been saving in a tin, and at the door she turned back. He was looking up at her from the floor, with his eyes burning in the dark. "If I do not come back," she said, "the loose board is under the washstand. There is a tin. Inside the tin there is enough silver to buy a horse and a passage to France. Take it. Go. Do not wait for me, Caspian. I mean it. Do not. Hesper, promise me. I will not promise you that. I will never promise you that." She closed the door before he could see what his words did to her face. The Duke received her in the small library, where he took his brandy in the late hours. He was a tall man, Ravenwick, lean and elegant, and 40 years old, with a kind of cold beauty that made women stare and then look quickly away. His hair was the color of wet ash, and his eyes were a pale, flat grey, and when he looked at Hesper from his armchair by the fire, she felt the room go small around her. "Come in, child," he said. His voice was warm. It was always warm. That was what made it so terrible. "Sit there closer. Do not be afraid of me. I have no patience for frightened girls. Tonight." She sat. She kept her eyes on the carpet, which was a thing he had taught her to do years ago, without ever once teaching her in words. "There has been an incident in the house tonight," he said. He swirled the brandy in his glass. "A thief. A common cut-purse, the watchmen think, who slipped past the gate. He wounded one of my men and fled. We have been searching for hours." She said nothing. She had learned at 12 that silence was the only true language in this house. "Hesper," he said, softer now, "look at me." She lifted her eyes. He was smiling. That was the worst part. He was smiling at her, the way a man smiles at a horse he is thinking of buying, weighing her, pricing her, considering the bones of her. "You have been with this house a long time," he said. "Since you were a babe in arms, I am told. My mother was fond of you. She used to call you her little evening star. Did you know that?" "Yes, Your Grace. She left you something in her will. Did you know that?" The room tilted. "No, Your Grace. A great deal, in fact. A foolish sum for a woman to leave a kitchen foundling. My solicitors have kept it from you all these years, on my instruction, for your own protection. A girl your age with that kind of money would only be preyed upon. You understand." She did not understand. She did not understand at all. Her heart was beating so loud she was certain he could hear it. "But you are no longer a child," he went on, "and I find myself in need of a wife, a quiet one, a grateful one, a girl with no family to make demands and no past to be dredged up, a girl who knows this house, who knows me, who would not embarrass me with finery or opinions or appetites I have no patience for." He took a slow sip of his brandy. "I had thought I might marry you, Hesper. Tomorrow night, at the ball, I had thought I might announce it." She could not breathe. "You do not look pleased, child." "I am only," she said, and her voice came out steady, which astonished her, "only overcome, Your Grace. I do not know what to say. Say yes, yes, Your Grace. Good girl." He rose from the armchair then, and crossed to her, and lifted her chin with one cool finger so that she had to meet his eyes. And she saw it then. The thing she had been refusing to see for years. The flat, empty grey of a man who had killed and would kill again, and felt nothing at all about either. "Tell me, Hesper," he said softly, "have you seen anyone tonight you should not have seen?" The world stopped. She heard the fire crack. She heard the clock tick. She heard her own pulse in her ears like a drum at an execution. And she made her face be the face it had always been in this house, blank and willing and small. And she said, "No, Your Grace. I have seen no one but Mrs. Aldenshaw." He looked at her for a long moment, a long, long moment. Then he smiled again and let her chin go. "Good," he said. "Go to bed, child. Tomorrow will be a long day for you." She did not remember the climb back to the attic. She did not remember the corridors or the stairs, or the turning of her own door handle. She only remembered falling to her knees beside the bed, and pulling Caspian out into her arms and burying her face in his bloody shirt, and weeping without any sound at all, because in this house even grief had to be silent. He held her. He stroked her hair with a hand that shook. He whispered things to her in the dark that she would never afterwards be able to repeat, half of them in a language she did not know, all of them tender as a blessing. "His mother left me money," she whispered into his collar. "He kept it from me. He is going to marry me to keep it, to keep me. He knows, Caspian, he knows I belong to someone. He looked at me and he knew. He suspects, he does not know. He will. By tomorrow night, he will. Then, by tomorrow night, we will be ready for him." She lifted her head and looked at him in the thin grey light that was already creeping in around the curtain, the first warning of a dawn she did not want to face. His face was so close to hers. So close she could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes and the small white scar at the corner of his mouth she did not remember, and the new lines that the last 3 years had carved between his brows. He looked at her mouth. She looked at his. Neither of them moved. 3 years of silence sat between them like a held breath, and behind that silence stood the ghosts of a girl of 17 and a stable boy who had kissed her behind a cherry tree and meant every word of it. They were still in there somewhere. She could feel them pressing against the inside of her ribs, begging to be let out. But she was not 17 anymore, and he was not a stable boy. And the house below them was a snare with its teeth already closing. She pulled back, slowly. With the small breaking sound a heart makes when it chooses duty over want. "Tell me about your sister," she whispered. "Tell me what he did to her. Tell me everything, Caspian, because tomorrow night I walk into that ballroom on his arm, and I need to know exactly what kind of monster I am smiling at." His face changed. Something old and terrible came into it. He opened his mouth to speak, and from the courtyard below, the great iron gate of Ravenwick groaned open in the dawn dark, and the sound of many horses came clattering up the drive. He had sent for someone. The Duke had sent for someone in the night. Someone he had ridden all the way to fetch in the hours since he had looked into her face and smiled. What had Caspian's sister suffered at the Duke's hands that even now made him pale to speak of her? Who had come riding through the gate at first light, and what fresh ruin did they bring with them? And could Hesper truly walk into that ballroom and smile at the man who had buried her love alive, without her own face betraying every secret she carried? Stay with me, my loves, because part 4 is where the ball begins, and the strangers from the dawn show their faces, and Hesper discovers that the worst secret in Ravenwick House is not Caspian's at all. Please, I am begging you on my knees, subscribe to the channel before you go, because the next part is the one that will undo you, and I cannot bear to tell it without you here beside me. Stay close. Stay quiet. Hesper is about to need every soul she has. Caspian pushed himself up on one elbow with a hiss of pain, and his face at the window was the face of a man looking at his own gallows. "Hesper," he said, "move away from the glass." Now, she did not move. She could not. She watched the horses come up the drive in the milk-grey light, 6 of them, ridden hard, their flanks steaming, and at the head of them, a man, in a long dark coat she had never seen before, with a face like cut stone and a sword at his hip that no gentleman should have been wearing in England in this year of our Lord. "Who is he?" she whispered. "His name is Mortimer Vane. He was my father's man once. Now he is the Duke's. He hunts people, Hesper. That is what he does. That is the only thing he does. If the Duke has sent for Vane, he no longer suspects. He knows." She felt the room go very far away from her. "Tell me about your sister," she said. Her voice did not sound like her own. "Tell me now, Caspian, before that man crosses this threshold, because I will not walk into that ballroom blind." He sank back onto the floorboards. He closed his eyes. And when he spoke, his voice was the voice of a man emptying a wound. Her name was Lyra. She was 19. She was clever and stubborn, and she laughed like a bell. And she came to this house as a governess to a child who did not exist. The Duke invented the child to bring her here. He had seen her at a coaching inn, and he had wanted her, and what Ravenwick wants, Ravenwick takes. She wrote me letters for 3 months. Happy at first, then careful, then afraid, then she stopped writing. When I came to fetch her, they told me she had run off with a footman. I knew she had not. I knew it in my bones. I started asking questions in the village. The wrong questions. To the wrong people. And one night on the North Road, a man rode out of the trees and put a pistol in my chest. He opened his eyes. They were dry. That was the most terrible part. They were perfectly dry. "I found her grave last spring," he said, "behind the chapel, unmarked. The sexton was drunk enough to tell me what she was buried with. A child, Hesper. She was buried with a child, his child, and the church had been paid to forget her name." Hesper put her hand over her mouth. "That is the man," he said. "That is the man you have served tea to. That is the man who is going to put his ring on your finger tonight. Unless you and I are very brave, and very clever, and very lucky in the next 12 hours. She thought she might be sick. She thought she might scream. She thought she might walk down the stairs right now and put a kitchen knife between his ribs and be done with it, and hang for it gladly. But none of that would save them. None of that would save the houseful of innocent souls who polished his silver and laid his fires. "What do you need me to do?" she said. He looked at her, and something passed across his face. Something that was love and grief and a kind of awe she had never been looked at with in her life. "I need you to smile at him tonight," he said quietly. "I need you to take his arm. I need you to let him present you to that ballroom as his bride. And while every eye in the room is on you, Hesper, I need you to do one thing for me. One thing only. There is a key. A small brass key. He wears it on a chain beneath his shirt. It opens a drawer in his desk. Inside that drawer is the proof of everything he has done. Letters, accounts, a confession my sister wrote before he silenced her. With that drawer open, Hesper, I can hang him. Without it, he will hang us both. You want me to steal a key from around his neck. I want you to live. The key is how." She laughed. It was not a happy sound. It was the laugh of a woman who has spent her life being told to be small, and is realizing, perhaps too late, that she was never small at all. "And if I do this," she said, "if I take his key and you take his life and we live, what then, Caspian? What becomes of us? You walk out of this house a free man, and I walk out a foundling maid with a stolen fortune and a dead duke's blood on my hands. Where do we go? What do we do? Who are we to each other in the morning?" He reached up, his hand cupped her face, blood still on his knuckles, and she let it. God help her. She let it. "In the morning," he said, "I am yours. If you will have me, I have been yours since I was 19 years old behind a cherry tree, Hesper, and I will be yours when I am 80 and toothless and no use to anyone. There is no morning in which I am not yours." She bent her head. Her forehead touched his. They did not kiss. They had not yet earned the right. But she breathed his breath and he breathed hers, and for one held heartbeat there was no duke and no house and no riders in the courtyard, only a girl and a boy, and a cherry tree that still bloomed somewhere inside them both. "Then I will get your key," she whispered. A fist hammered on her door. "Hesper!" Mrs. Aldenshaw's voice, sharp now, frightened perhaps for the first time in 60 years. "Hesper, open this door. His Grace's man is here." He says he means to search every room in this house, beginning with yours." Caspian's hand tightened on hers. She rose, she smoothed her skirt. She set her face into the small blank thing she had worn. For 11 years, the face of a girl with nothing to hide, because she had nothing at all. And she looked at the man under the bed one last time, the man she had buried and unburied, and was about to walk into fire for, and she let him see her, all of her, down to the bone. "If I do not come back," she said, "find the cherry tree." She opened the door. What would Mortimer Vane find when he tore Hesper's small room apart? And could Caspian truly hide from a hunter who had already killed him once? What did Hesper mean by the cherry tree, and what does she plan to do if the worst should come to pass? And when she stands before that ballroom, tonight in silk and pearls, with a knife of a secret pressed against her ribs, will her hand be steady enough to steal a key from a monster's throat without trembling once? Stay with me, my darlings, because part 5 is the ball itself. The music and the chandeliers and the Duke's cold hand on Hesper's waist, and the moment she has been walking toward all her life. Please, please, I am begging you with all my heart, subscribe to the channel before the music begins, because the next part is the one I have been afraid to write, and I need you here when the first note plays. Do not leave Hesper alone on that dance floor. She has been alone long enough. Mortimer Vane stepped into her room, and the air went out of it. He was not a tall man. He was not a broad man. He was something worse than either. He was a still man, and stillness in a hunter is the most dangerous quality of all. His eyes moved once around the small attic, the cot, the washstand, the curtain, the loose floorboard. She prayed he could not see beneath the rag rug. Then his eyes came back to her face and stayed there. "Sit, girl!" She sat on the cot, above the floorboards, above Caspian, who had crawled into the narrow gap behind the wainscoting in the 3 breaths between Mrs. Aldenshaw's voice and the opening of her door, a hiding place she had shown him with one mute pointing finger and a prayer. Vane did not search. That was the strange thing. He did not lift the rug, or shift the washstand, or open the small wooden chest at the foot of the bed. He only stood there and looked at her with eyes the color of pond ice, and Hesper understood at once that Vane did not search rooms. Vane searched faces, and he had been told by a duke who had felt her pulse in the small library at midnight that her face was the room worth searching. "His Grace tells me you are to be married tonight," he said. His voice was soft, almost kind. "Congratulations. Thank you, sir. You must be very happy." "I am, sir." He took one slow step closer. "There is blood beneath your fingernails, girl. Did you know that?" She did not look down. She did not breathe. She held his eyes, and she made her own eyes wide and stupid, the way she had been making them wide and stupid since she was 9 years old, and she said, "I was scrubbing the kitchen tiles before bed, sir. Mrs. Aldenshaw is most particular. I cut my hand on a broken cup. I am sorry, sir. I will see to it before tonight." He looked at her a long, long moment. Then he smiled. It was a small smile. It did not reach anywhere near his eyes. "See that you do," he said. His Grace would not wish his bride to come down the stair with dirty hands. He left. The door closed. She did not move for a count of 100, because she knew in her marrow, that Mortimer Vane was the kind of man who opened doors twice. And on the count of 73 the door opened again, and his face was there in the gap. And he was looking at her still sitting on the cot, with her hands folded in her lap like a good girl, and he nodded once and closed the door for good. Only then did Caspian come out of the wall. The hours after that ran like fever. Mrs. Aldenshaw came with a gown, a real one, white silk and pearls along the bodice and a train that whispered when Hesper turned. It had belonged to the Duke's mother, Mrs. Aldenshaw said without meeting her eyes, and Hesper understood then that the old housekeeper had known about the will all along, had known about all of it, and had said nothing for 60 silent years, because silence was the only currency a woman in this house had ever been allowed to spend. They dressed her. They pinned up her hair. They put pearls in her ears that had hung in the ears of a dead woman who had named her after the evening star. And when Hesper looked at herself in the long glass, she did not know the woman who looked back. A pale, tall stranger with a queen's mouth and eyes like a knife held under water. The ballroom that night blazed. 1,000 candles, mirrors throwing the light back upon itself until the room felt like the inside of a struck bell. Guests in silk and feathers, voices high and bright. The small, careful laughter of people who knew that something interesting was about to happen and did not yet know what it would cost them. The Duke met her at the foot of the great staircase. He wore black. He took her hand. He looked at her for one long moment, and something passed behind his pale grey eyes that she could not read, and then he turned to the room and lifted her hand and said in that warm, terrible voice, "My friends, may I present to you the future Duchess of Ravenwick?" The room roared. Or perhaps that was the blood in her ears, she could not tell. He led her into the first dance. His hand was cold at her waist. His other hand held hers like a falcon holds a small bird, gently, gently, with every claw aware of itself. "You are very pale, my love. I am only overcome, your grace. You may call me Edmund tonight. Edmund." The name turned to ash in her mouth. He pulled her closer. Close enough that her cheek brushed his lapel. Close enough that, when she let her hand drift up beneath the pretense of steadying herself against his shoulder, her fingertips touched the chain at his throat, through the fine linen of his shirt. The chain was there, the key was there. A small hard shape against her knuckle. She had one breath in the whole spinning room. She slipped her hand inside his collar, as though to clutch at him in maidenly distress. And she snapped the chain with one hard pull, and she let the key drop into her closed fist as her arm fell back to her side. He did not feel it, or he did, and he gave no sign. The music turned, he spun her out, he drew her back. The room watched, the chandeliers blazed, and then his mouth was at her ear. "Hesper, my love," he murmured. "Did you truly think I would let you marry me without first knowing every thought in that small foundling head?" The floor dropped out from under her. "I know about the boy under your bed," he breathed. "I have known since the moment my mother's pearls touched your throat. Vane told me everything, the blood, the hiding place, the cherry tree. I know it all, and I have allowed it to her because I wanted you to come to me of your own free will. I wanted you to choose, so choose now, my love. Look up at the gallery." She looked up. Caspian stood in the high gallery above the ballroom, white as a winding sheet. 2 of the Duke's men holding his arms. A third man stood behind him with the muzzle of a pistol pressed to the soft place behind his ear. The music played on. The dancers turned on. No one in the bright spinning room had looked up. No one but her. "The key in your hand," the Duke whispered, "or his life. You have 10 seconds, my evening star. I should so love to see what you are made of." She did not have 10 seconds. She had one. She closed her eyes. She thought of a cherry tree in a summer she had been 17, for she thought of a baby on a kitchen step in winter. She thought of a girl named Lyra she had never met, buried with a child behind a country chapel. And she opened her eyes and she smiled at Edmund Ravenwick, the smile she had been practicing in the dark of her attic for 11 years. And she said in a voice clear enough to carry, "Your Grace, I feel faint. Might we step into the air?" He laughed. He actually laughed, low and delighted. "Brave girl, very well. Let us step into the air." He turned her toward the long doors that led onto the terrace, and as he turned her, her free hand slipped the key into the silver punch bowl on the long table they passed. A small bright splash. lost at once among ice and lemon, and the bobbing rinds no one saw, no one but her. She was banking everything on one thing, that Mrs. Aldenshaw, who had stood at her elbow at every meal of her life, who had known about the will and the gown and the dead woman's pearls, had been waiting 60 years for a girl with the courage to break her silence. She was banking on a glance she had given the old housekeeper in the glass that evening. A glance the old woman had returned without a flicker. The Duke walked her out onto the terrace. The cold air struck her face. Caspian was still in the gallery above, with a pistol at his ear, and she had perhaps 30 seconds before the Duke realized the key was gone from her hand. She had 30 seconds, and she used them. "I chose," she said quietly. "I chose 3 years ago, Edmund, when I knelt in the snow at a grave you put him in. I chose again the night you put your mother's pearls around my throat and called me your love. And I am choosing now." She drove the long pearl pin from her hair into the side of his throat. He made a sound, a small surprised sound, not even a cry. The pin had found the artery, as the cook had once shown her on a pig long ago in a kitchen, that no one had thought a foundling girl was listening in. Blood came in a black sheet down his white shirt, and his pale grey eyes went wide and astonished, as though the world had at last managed to do something he had not foreseen. He fell to his knees on the terrace stones. She did not watch him die. She turned and she ran, and as she ran, she screamed the only thing that might save Caspian in the gallery, screamed it at the top of her lungs into the bright, crowded ballroom. Murder. The Duke is murdered. He fell on his own pin. There is a confession in the punch bowl. Mrs. Aldenshaw, the punch bowl, now, and Mrs. Aldenshaw, who had been waiting 60 years, did not hesitate. She plunged her old, strong arm into the silver bowl and lifted out a dripping brass key. And she held it above her head, and she shouted in a voice no one in that house had ever heard from her before, "I have served this family for 60 years. I will tell you all what is in his desk." The ballroom erupted. In the chaos, Caspian's guards turned to look. In the chaos, Caspian drove his elbow into one throat and his knee into another, and the pistol fired into the ceiling, and a chandelier came down in a rain of glass and screaming. She found him on the great staircase. She did not know how. Her white silk was red to the waist with the Duke's blood, and she did not care. He caught her in his arms, and they did not speak. There was nothing to speak. They held each other on the staircase, while a houseful of guests ran past them, shrieking, and somewhere above them Mrs. Aldenshaw was unlocking a drawer that would hang a dead duke after the fact, and free a foundling and a stable boy and a girl named Lyra all at once. He pulled back. He looked at her face. He saw the Duke's blood on her cheek and the steel under her eyes and the woman she had become in one terrible night. "Marry me," he said. "Hesper, marry me. Tonight, tomorrow, the day after. I do not care. Marry me." She laughed through her tears. It was a real laugh this time, a sound she had not made in 3 years. "I have just murdered a duke, Caspian. I am not sure I am respectable enough to marry. Then we will be ruined together." "Yes," she whispered, "yes. Ruined together. Yes." But even as he bent his head to hers, even as she closed her eyes for the kiss, 3 years in coming, the great doors of Ravenwick House burst open at the foot of the stair, and standing in the doorway, with his coat black against the night and his eyes like pond ice, was Mortimer Vane, and he was not alone. What had Mortimer Vane brought through the great doors of Ravenwick House? And was the Duke's death truly the end of the danger, or only the beginning of a new one? What did Mrs. Aldenshaw find in that drawer that made her old face go white as bone? And could Hesper and Caspian, free at last of the man who had haunted them both, survive the storm that the Duke had set in motion before he ever fell to his knees on the terrace stones? Stay with me, my loves, because part 6 is the reckoning, the answer to every question, the cost of every choice, and the morning that comes after the longest night of Hesper's life. Please, with my whole heart, I am begging you to subscribe to the channel before you go, because the ending is the part I have been writing toward since the first word, and I cannot bear to tell it without you here. Stay with Hesper. Stay with Caspian. The cherry tree is waiting. Mortimer Vane stepped into the great hall of Ravenwick, and the screaming behind him stopped, not all at once, by degrees, the way a tide pulls back from a shore. The guests, pressed against the walls, saw him and went silent, and the silence spread out from him in a slow ring until even the broken chandelier had stopped its tinkling on the marble floor. Behind him came men, not the Duke's men, different men. Men in the dark green coats of the king's own magistrates, with a tall, white-haired gentleman at their head, whose face Hesper did not know, but whose voice, when he spoke, was the voice of a court. In the name of His Majesty, the white-haired man said, no one is to leave this house. Caspian's arms tightened around her on the stair. She felt him sway. 3 days without sleep, a wound still seeping at his side, the woman he loved drenched in another man's blood at his shoulder. He was not going to stand much longer. She set her hand against his chest, as though she could pour her own strength into him through her palm, and perhaps she could, because he steadied. Vane crossed the hall. He stopped at the foot of the stair. He looked up at the two of them, the foundling maid and the murdered stable boy, and he did the last thing in the world Hesper had expected. He bowed. It was a small bow, a formal one. The kind of bow a soldier gives a commanding officer he has finally been allowed to obey. "My lord," he said. Caspian closed his eyes, just for a moment, as though those 2 words had been heavier to receive than any blow. "Hesper," he said quietly, "I have one more thing to tell you. I should have told you in the attic. I did not, because I did not know if we would live to need it." She waited. "My name is not Caspian Ash," he said. "It was, once. It was the name I was using when I came to Ravenwick 3 summers ago, because my father had sent me to learn what the Duke was doing on our northern lands. My true name is Caspian Ash Marrow. My father was the Earl of Marrowmere. He died last winter. I am, God help me, the Earl now, and the man you see at the foot of the stair has been my father's man and mine since before I was born. He came to Ravenwick on my orders, my love. Not the Duke's. He has been my eyes inside this house for 3 years. The hall tilted. She steadied herself against him. "You were a stable boy," she said. The words came out very small. "I was a boy who loved horses," he said, "and who fell in love with a kitchen girl in a garden at dawn, and who would have given up the earldom and every acre of it to stay her stable boy forever. I was not lying to you, Hesper. I was hiding from him. There is a difference. I swear to you, on every saint we do not believe in, there is a difference." She thought about it. She thought about it while a houseful of strangers in green coats moved through the ballroom behind them, while Mrs. Aldenshaw came down from the gallery with a brass key in one hand and a sheaf of yellowed letters in the other, while somewhere out on the terrace stones the body of Edmund Ravenwick, cooled in his own blood. She thought about a boy of 19 behind a cherry tree, and the way he had looked at her then, and the way he was looking at her now. And she found, to her own astonishment, that she was not angry. A man may hide what he is. He cannot hide who he is. And who Caspian was, she had known since she was 17. "You are still going to have to explain the earldom to me," she said, in small words. "I am only a foundling, you know." He laughed. It was a thin, broken laugh, half a sob in it, but it was a laugh. "You are not," he said. "You never were. You are the daughter of the woman my mother named you for." The world stopped a second time. Smaller this time, quieter. "What?" "That is what is in the drawer, Hesper, among other things." the old Duchess of Ravenwick's sister. She married badly, she died young, the babe. She left on a kitchen step in winter, with a slip of paper pinned to her shawl that the cook burned, was her own. The Duchess knew. The Duchess could not claim you publicly without ruining her sister's memory, so she gave you a name and a roof, and put a sum of money in trust for the day you came of age. Edmund found the papers when she died. He kept them, he kept you. He meant to marry the fortune back into his own hands, and the girl with it, and silence both forever. I have known since the spring. I would have told you. I was going to tell you tonight, in the attic before Vane came up the stair. I am telling you now. She did not cry. She had cried enough for one life in one night. She only stood very still on the great stair, with her hand on the chest of a man she had buried and unburied, and she let the truth come in through her skin slowly. The way warmth comes back into a hand that has been too long in the cold. She had not been left. Somewhere a woman she would never meet had loved her enough to die, naming her. Somewhere an old duchess had loved her enough to call her after the evening star. Somewhere a stable boy who was not a stable boy had loved her enough to crawl out of a ditch on the North Road and stay alive for 3 years on the thought of her face. She had been loved her whole life. She had only never been told. She bent her head. She let it come. 2 tears, no more. Caspian wiped them with his thumb and did not say anything, because he was wise enough to know there were no words for that particular kind of grief, which is the grief of a thing being healed. The white-haired magistrate came to the foot of the stair. He took off his hat. He looked at Hesper in her red-soaked silk and her dead woman's pearls and her ruined hair, and he did not look away from any of it. "Madam," he said, "I am told there is a confession in the punch bowl and a drawer of letters in the library, and I am told you are to thank for both. The law will have questions of you. The law will have questions of you both. But not tonight. Tonight you will sleep, and you will eat, and you will be tended by my own physician, who is already in the kitchen boiling water. The questions will keep until morning." "And the Duke," she said. The Duke fell on a pin in his own throat in front of 200 witnesses, while pursuing a lady onto a terrace. The lady, by all accounts, was defending her virtue. "I should not lose any sleep over the Duke, madam. The King will not." He bowed. He stepped back. The men in green coats moved to begin the long, quiet work of unmaking Ravenwick's house and everything it had stood for. Mrs. Aldenshaw climbed the stair to them. She stopped 1 step below where they stood. She looked up at Hesper for a long moment, and her old iron face did a thing it had not done in 60 years. It softened. "Forgive me, child," she said. "I held my tongue too long. I was afraid. I was so very afraid." Hesper bent down and kissed the old woman's cheek. It was the first kiss either of them had given or received in a great many years. "You were waiting for me to be ready," she said. "I was not ready until tonight." Mrs. Aldenshaw nodded, just once. Then she straightened. She put the brass key into Hesper's hand and closed her fingers over it. "This is yours now. This house is yours now, by the old Duchess's will, which Edmund could not break, though he tried for 15 years. You are her heir, Hesper. You always were." She turned and went down the stair, and the dark pot green out for her like water for a ship. Hesper looked at the key in her palm. Then she looked at the man beside her. "I do not want it," she said. "What would you do with it instead?" "Open every window. Burn every account book in the cellar. Pay every servant a year's wages in coin, and let them go where they will. Tear up the contracts on the northern tenants. Plant a cherry tree in the front court, where everyone can see it. And then, Caspian Ashmarrow, Earl of wherever it is you said, I would lock the door of Ravenwick behind me and go home with you, and never set foot in this house again." He looked at her. His eyes were so tired, they were so full. That," he said softly, is exactly what we will do." He bent his head. She lifted hers. And, on the great staircase of Ravenwick House, with the body of a dead duke still warm on the terrace, and a houseful of strangers moving below them, and the first grey light of an English dawn coming in through the high windows, he kissed her. He kissed her the way a man kisses a woman he has been kissing in his mind every night for 3 years. Slowly, carefully, as though her mouth were the last warm thing in a cold world, as though he had all of time and meant to spend every minute of it just here. She kissed him back, not as a foundling, not as a maid, not as the small, careful girl who had walked these halls with her eyes on the carpet. She kissed him as Hesper, the evening star, a name from a kind mouth that she had earned the right to wear at last. They did not go to France. They went north, to a quiet stone house at the edge of the moor, where the sea could be heard on cold nights, and the cherry trees in the front court bloomed white as bridal silk in their first April. Mrs. Aldenshaw came with them and ran the kitchen with a young, soft-eyed undermaid called Lily at her elbow, and Mortimer Vane took rooms in the village and trained the boys in swordcraft on Saturday mornings, because it turned out the only thing more terrible than a hunter at war was a hunter without one. Hesper learned to read the long letters her aunt, the old Duchess, had left her. Caspian healed slowly, and then quickly, and then completely, and the silver at his temples stayed, but the lines between his brows began to smooth. They married in the village chapel with the sexton sober for once, and the whole moor turned out in their best. And Hesper wore a plain grey dress because she had had quite enough of silk for one lifetime. The cherry tree they planted in the front court bloomed the next spring. And the spring after that, beneath its first pale petals, a small dark-eyed girl was born to them. They named her Lyra. Caspian carried his daughter out under the tree the first warm morning of her life and lifted her up so that the petals fell on her small face, and Hesper stood in the doorway in her grey dress and watched them, and she thought, very simply, very quietly, this is what we were rising toward all along, a foundling baby on a kitchen step, a boy in a ditch on the North Road, a girl with a pin in her hair on a terrace at midnight. All of it had been the road to this cherry tree. She stepped down into the morning and went to her family, and the door of the small stone house stood open behind her, and the wind off the moor smelled of salt and grass, and the new beginning of every good thing she had ever been told she did not deserve. And somewhere far behind them, on a hill in Yorkshire, Ravenwick House stood empty, its windows shuttered, its great gate rusting shut. The cherry tree in its front court grew wild and untended, and every spring when its petals fell, they fell on nothing at all. But here on the moor, the petals fell on a child. Thank you, my darlings. Thank you for staying with Hesper through every dark hour. Thank you for not leaving her on that staircase, or that terrace, or in that cold attic with a man bleeding into her apron. She made it because you stayed. They both did. If this story moved you even a little, please tap that subscribe button before you go, and tell me in the comments which moment broke you open. Because I read every single one, and your words are the cherry tree I am planting in my own front court. There are more stories waiting in the dark. Come back tomorrow. I will be here. Stay close, my loves. The next one is already beginning.